Welcome to our Tuesday edition of our staff Easter devotionals. We're looking forward to spending time with you again in the future in person, but so glad that we as a staff can be able to share these times with you as we look forward to the blessed resurrection of our Savior this coming Sunday. So yesterday Brian talked about in his video about Jesus being the righteous priest. Today we're going to look at some scriptures that refer to Jesus as the righteous judge. Now these scriptures that we're looking at today are at the end of a teaching that Jesus had with his disciples that consumes most of chapters 24 and 25. And he's talking about the various traits about the end times and things that they can expect and signs that they can be able to see concerning the end times and his second coming. So he uses several parables in chapters 24 and 25 to be able to help us and be able to help them understand just exactly what they could be expecting when he would return. He begins with one of them is the fig tree, which kind of helps us to be able to see the many signs that will accompany him in terms of physical and political and the religious viewpoints that will be going on and religious happenings that will be going on in his time. We also see the parable of the faithful servant, which teaches us as faithful Christians to be faithful until our Master returns, doing the things that we need to do. We also see the next one is the parable of the 10 virgins, which reminds us always to be prepared and be alert because our Master could come back at any time. And then we see the parable of the talents that reminds us that we are each to use the talents and the abilities that God has given each one of us to be able to fulfill his kingdom, to be able to further his work here on this earth until he comes back. And lastly, the parable that you will read today is a parable where we see is a parable about the sheep and the goats and the separating of the sheep and the goats and encouraging us to follow him and to be a sheep and follow the great shepherd. You know, this idea of separating evil from good or sinners from righteousness, it can often be difficult for us to be able to understand because we want to believe, and he certainly is, our God is certainly a loving, merciful, and grace-filled God. But as we have looked at it in our First Peter study that the staff has done the last couple of weeks, we also see that God is holy. And because he is holy, he demands judgment for our sin. And there is a time that he is going to call for separation between the goat, what he calls the sheep, and the goats. So even though he knows our hearts, and even though he knows our minds, and he understands our spirit and our motivations, it's interesting here in this parable that he actually uses outward signs and outward symbols to determine the people that are righteous and the people that are unrighteous. You know, just like the sermon that Pastor Jacob gave on Sunday where Jacob compared Mary and Judas. The goats are much like Judas in that they were incredibly narcissistic, self-absorbed, all about themselves. And the sheep are the ones that look to be able to serve Jesus just the way Mary did. You know, so our question today as we think about these, the separation between the sheep and the goats and which side we will be on, we have to ask ourselves, not just are we on the proper side of following Jesus, but also how does this affect how we judge others? So are we judging others by their actions, the way that Jesus judges them in a way that is helping to further the kingdom? Or are we judging others by some other man-made selfish standard that we might be using, which would be sinful in God's eyes? So as we look through these scriptures today, I just pray that as we think about God being the righteous judge and being prepared for his time to come, we just pray that you would just find these an encouragement to you and your family. We miss you. We look forward to seeing you as soon as possible. God bless you.